Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
Education in Duval County is really something to be proud of. Size alone is pretty impressive. Our school district covers over 800 square miles, making it the 17th largest school district in the U.S. We have almost 6,000 teachers and over 100,000 students in over 140 schools, and more are still being built. We have a school for the arts, a college preparatory school, and 3 skills centers for vocational education, and we seem to have programs to fit the needs of all kinds of students, from kids in kindergarten to seniors in high school.
And consider our achievements. Students in Duval County schools score well above the Florida average of the Scholastic Aptitude Test in both math and verbal areas, and we're well above the national average of the Stanford Achievement Test. Our number of National Merit semifinalists has steadily increased over the last 5 years, with even greater increases in the number of National Achievement Scholars and Hispanic Scholars. Our school district was selected by the Woman's World magazine as one of the top 25 school districts in the nation. We have received special recognition by the Department of Education as well as our president.
Students in Duval County really do have a lot to be proud of.
But it always hasn't been that way.
You don't see me at the segregated school. You can't find me nowhere. Come on over to the integrated school. I'll be studying over there.
The story of education in Duval County is a remarkable one. It is the story of travail and triumph, a story full of struggles and successes, of defeat followed by distinction. The story begins with the opening of the first free school prior to the Civil War. A uniform system of common schools. But without much demand for public education, schools were scattered and school records were fragmentary. But Duval County made the record books early. As early as 1881, Duval County schools were considered to be at the top of public education for the state. Duval High was known as the finest and most advanced public school in Florida. And Stanton Institute, started in 1869, was regarded as perhaps the finest Negro school in the state. Author, lyricist, poet James Weldon Johnson recalls his early days in Jacksonville.
My mother was my first teacher and began my lessons in reading before I ever went to school. She was, in fact, the first colored woman public school teacher in Florida. And when my school days began at Stanton, the central school in Jacksonville for colored children, she was one of the teachers there.
James Weldon Johnson graduated from Stanton and went to Atlanta University to complete his education because there was no high school for blacks in Jacksonville. He later returned to Stanton as the principal.
And he went to ask the school board if they would let build a high school or let the black community build a high school for black children so that they could graduate from high school here. And the answer was no. So he simply just told the parents of those children who were in his 8th grade class to bring them back next year. We'll have 9th grade, and to bring them back each year. That happened until they got to 12th grade.
Stanton did become a full 12 years school for black children, but the two systems, one for whites and one for blacks, were to remain separate for some time. From the early days, Duval County pupils were offered a way to school. Duval was the first county in the state to provide significant pupil transportation. By the turn of the century, Duval County schools had consolidated from 45 single-teacher schools into 15 centrally located schools. Duval County was in the forefront of public education in Florida. The Great Fire of 1901 leveled a large portion of the city, taking many schools and school records with it. Duval High School and Stanton Institute were destroyed, as well as Central Grammar School, St. Joseph's Academy, and Edward Waters College. The problem of providing for displaced students and teachers was temporarily handled by creating half-day sessions in the schools in Springfield and Riverside. While schools were being rebuilt, extra classes were also held in La Villa and other grammar schools. In 1908, Duval High reopened on Ocean Street. In 1914, Jacksonville citizens voted for a $1 million bond issue for modern expansion. Stanton reopened on Ashley Street in 1917. By 1924, 24 schools for whites and 5 schools for black children were listed as fully equipped and operating. Subsequent bond issues produced more modernization and construction. Overcrowded Duval High was replaced by Stanton High School, Andrew Jackson, and Lee in 1927. Duval High School became the school administration building. As most everything else, schools fell on hard times during the Great Depression of the 30s, but recovery was rapid. In 1936, Duncan Fletcher opened as the first fully equipped area school, complete with an auditorium, cafeteria, gymnasium, and industrial arts shop. The Bowles School opened as a military academy for boys in 1933. In the following year, Bartram, a private school for girls, was founded. The end of World War II brought a population boom, a $14 million construction program for schools, and returning GIs with money but no opportunity for higher education, Jacksonville had little to offer. Edward Waters College, formerly Brown Theological Institute, had been in operation at its present-day Kings Road location since 1907. Porter University, later Jacksonville Junior College before becoming JU, opened in 1934, but did not offer a 4-year degree until 1959. It would be some time before comprehensive higher education would be available to Jacksonville residents. But public instruction in the elementary and secondary levels kept growing. The 50s witnessed the birth of new schools along with the baby boom. Elementary schools appeared at Lake Forest, Southside Estates, and Baldwin. Junior and senior highs were constructed. Inglewood, Terry Parker, Revolt, Paxson, and Darnell Cookman. Still, school expansion had trouble keeping up with the population growth. There simply wasn't enough money to provide for needed classrooms and staff, let alone to keep older schools in good repair. In some cases, new schools actually opened in double sessions.
I started teaching in 1956 in Jacksonville at Westconnett Elementary School. Interestingly enough, we were assigned to a portable building at that time to teach in. This was the 6th grade. We had barracks which had been made in what they call wooden portables at the elementary school, and they referred to them as being temporary permanent buildings. They were put up temporarily, but they were having to use them as permanent structure.
Overcrowding was but one of the many problems Duval County faced. The condition of buildings themselves, including fire hazards, was another. Teachers' salaries another.
Well, I was superintendent from 1957 to 1969, and there were about 80,000 youngsters, grades 1 through 12 in school at that time. And at the end of my tenure, we had 22,000, and they were housed in approximately 140 different school centers. And the biggest problem we had really was the lack of money.
Lack of money was a serious problem. In 1959, a survey committee of the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools, or SACS, threatened to discredit Andrew Jackson, one of Jacksonville's finest and oldest high schools. Defective wiring, bad lighting, and a leaky roof, and overcrowded classrooms were among the reasons listed. There were many problems with the schools, and lack of adequate financial support was at the bottom of many of them.
At that time, there was a millage. 10 mills were voted by the property owners in the city. That was the limit you could vote. And each year that I was there, they voted the limit. We had a budget commission that controlled the other 10 mills that the schools could get.
Property assessments didn't produce adequate revenue. partly because of this constitutional limitation. But the other part of the story is that property in Duval County was being assessed substantially below real market value, and officials and citizens continually refused to reassess property to broaden the tax base. The media began to campaign vigorously for change. The Florida Times-Union produced almost daily articles on different facets of the school crisis. WFGA-TV, now WTLV-TV 12, aired special half-hour programs on schools only to be accused by many viewers of exaggerating the facts. Public apathy and resistance to reassessment were crippling the school system. A report issued in 1962 called for community leaders to step forward and meet the challenge. The School Bootstrap Committee was formed and subsequently plunged into a political campaign for its own candidate for tax assessor. Although they lost the election, more people were alerted to this critical situation. The Duval County Taxpayers Association subsequently brought suit against the tax assessor. Judge William Durden ruled in favor of the Taxpayers Association and ordered property reassessment at full case value. Taxes soared. Relief was finally coming to Duval County schools. But the decision to change had been made too late. In December of 1964, the Sachs Committee discredited all 15 Duval County high schools. This was indeed a decade of disaster for education. At that time, the school system and the school board were a separate entity with little direct relationship to local government. State law regulated this county-wide system. The county school board, the superintendent, and the board of school trustees were all elected officials, a situation which encouraged keeping one's eye on the election calendar. John McDonald recalls.
As I remember the problem, the elected school superintendent was not entirely responsible to the school board, and he was responsible for political pressure that influenced some of his decisions. But in all fairness, we never gave him the money to really do a good job.
School disaccreditation came in the wake of other major changes for Jacksonville. The inefficient and ineffective operation of two governments, one for the city and one for the county, had created a situation ripe for corruption and graft. In the face of grand jury indictments of public officials, citizens were looking at problems of air pollution, water pollution, rapid growth in the county, a declining city population, and governmental structures too cumbersome to handle these urgent matters. A special request was made to the legislature to form a study commission to look at these problems and try to find a solution. The results of this study, released in Blueprint for Improvement, recommended a government which collapsed or consolidated the two forms of government into one. They also recommended an appointed superintendent of schools and placing the school board under this new consolidated government. The release of the Peabody Report and the humiliation of disaccreditation awakened the public to the crisis in education. An apathetic community was pushed into action. Not only were the schools in a state of financial crisis, they had been operating as separate systems for blacks and whites since Reconstruction. Mary Blocker, a teacher at Isaiah Blocker School, was one of the first to protest.
Mrs. Blocker sued the school board for equal salaries for black teachers in the early 40s because there had been such a great difference between the salaries of black and white teachers. In the process, she lost her job.
Mary Blocker lost her job, but she won her case. Although salaries for black teachers improved, inequities existed in per capita expenditures for black and white students. The schools remained separate.
I moved to Jacksonville from Newark, New Jersey in 1953. I was transferred here by the Prudential Insurance Company. And my youngest daughter joined the school system in about 57. And when I started to look at it, I was appalled. We had a great school system for white people, and we had a terrible school system for the blacks. And it just was not right, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many other people. And we started to do a little agitation to try to combine the school systems. Well, it never would have succeeded had it not been for several of our Supreme Court decisions that forced the integration of schools.
Court order followed court order. In 1962, 8 years after the Brown decision, U.S. District Judge Simpson ordered school officials to submit a plan for opening all schools on a non-racial basis. The school board's plan of integrating one grade at a time was found unacceptable. In December 1969, the Fifth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals announced that the public schools had to operate unitary systems immediately. Judge McRae ordered that the racial makeup of teaching staffs reflect the general population ratios as well. When teacher reassignments occurred, 59 teachers submitted resignations. The next year, District Judge Choflat ordered massive crosstown busing and the closing of the 8 all-black inner-city schools. After a century of maintaining separate systems, Duval County schools were finally desegregating. It was a difficult period of adjustment for many. Many white students opted for private academies. Some blacks preferred the security of segregated schools to the racial prejudice in the new settings. Long bus rides were endured by many. Some claim that Duval County was the most bus school district in the country. If the turmoil of the 60s created a decade of disaster, the move into the 70s represented a shift to success. The new consolidated government brought an appointed superintendent and a nonpartisan school board. Cecil Hardesty, a highly regarded educator and national consultant, was brought in from San Diego, California, faced with 2 major problems, disaccreditation and court-ordered desegregation. Superintendent Hardesty assembled a team of educators from throughout the country and set to work. Local educators, including Dean Blankenship and the late Dr. Robinson, were added to this team. The group worked to bring education in Duval County back to the forefront. Under Hardesty's administration, significant strides were made toward reaccreditation, and new standards were set in place for educational performance. Following his successful tenure, Hardesty returned to California. He was replaced by Dr. John T. Gunning from Syracuse, New York. Meanwhile, higher education in Duval County had been making substantial progress. Edward Waters College was accredited by the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools as a junior college in 1955. By 1960, there were once more awarding bachelor's degrees. Leaving the old K Mansion on Riverside Avenue, Jacksonville Junior College relocated on the current Riverfront campus in September 1950. In 1956, they proudly announced plans for a 4-year program and officially became Jacksonville University. Graduate studies were added in 1963. Jones College, meanwhile, had grown from a school for secretaries to a major business school. The College of Medical Arts and Business was added in 1969. A legislative bill authorizing the establishment of a junior college brought Florida Junior College at Jacksonville into being in 1965. FJC opened its doors for classes in the renovated Southside Grammar School. A class of 2,610 students admitted in the fall of 1966 was hailed as the largest enrollment for any beginning institution in the history of Florida, public or private, perhaps the largest of any institution in the country. They began renovating frame structures from an abandoned World War II naval housing complex on Roosevelt Boulevard in preparation for more classrooms. Demands grew for the college's services and permanent campuses were constructed. By 1982, annual enrollment had increased to over 79,000 students. The University of North Florida was also authorized by the state legislature in 1965. When they opened their doors for classes in 1972, they offered programs at the junior, senior, and graduate levels. Freshman and sophomore programs were added in the fall of 1984. As higher education gained a sure foothold in Jacksonville, public education continued to thrive. Superintendent Gunning was followed by Herb Sang.
In 1977, which was the following year after I became superintendent, the state of Florida put into operation for the first time a state assessment test. They called it in those days a functional literacy test. But the purpose was to determine those students that could graduate. We didn't do well. Out of 67 school districts, we ranked 56. And we received national attention for the first time. That was because at one of our high schools, 80% of the students had failed the math portion of the functional literacy test.
Superintendent Sang attacked not only assessment test scores, he worked toward accreditation for all schools.
What I decided that we would do is not only in changing this feeling about our schools, let's get all of our schools accredited. No large school district in the United States had ever done that. In fact, we became the first large urban school district to be fully accredited. We earned the title of being the nation's largest fully accredited school system.
Changes have occurred. A partnership in business was started with the Chamber of Commerce. Parental involvement was encouraged. PTA membership grew.
So we've just seen a tremendous change. We have been becoming more mature as a school district, and yet that has been because we've been able to see beyond the next year. That's part of what I said earlier about having a vision. This district has, every attempt has been made to have a vision for the kids for this school system.
Part of having a vision requires having the dollars to fund it. Attempts to get those dollars have been major challenges.
The Duval County School Board bond issue came across the voters twice. The first time it happened, it was a $113 million bond issue, and it received a terrible defeat in the black community as a result of the ministers, the NAACP, SCLC, and the Urban League feeling that it was not a positive bond issue for the community at large and the black community in particular. Specifically, there was very little consultation as to what was needed in the black community in terms of the development of schools, repairing of schools. We felt that there was not an adequate distribution of the dollars to make it worth our while passing the bond issue. It failed.
The bond issue failed because the people behind it failed to convince the community of its need. They tried again.
The school board felt that a bond issue was still needed for this city, so what they did was to put together a special task force, which was chaired by Charles Hughes of Florida National Bank, and I was vice chair of that task force, and the purpose of that was to see if the community at large could come to agreement on a bond issue that could be put before the public and what amount that bond issue should be. There were a number of weeks of discussion, planning, reviewing. Throughout all of those discussions, we decided we did need a bond issue. We decided on a number of projects which needed to be done, some immediately, some not too immediate. We decided certainly that there needed to be new schools in high growth areas, and came out to the public with a $191 million bond issue, which passed. It was a slim margin, but it passed by a lot more than it failed by the first time.
When the community gets involved, the job gets done. The community has struggled with issues of disaccreditation, desegregation, busing, sex education, low test scores, overcrowding, inadequate facilities. The school system has come from the dark ages of disaccreditation to distinction. The people have helped to turn the system around. But are these battles ever won? The 80s ushered in a new set of challenges. We currently face many problems: school dropouts, drugs, discipline, teenage pregnancies. Some critics say test scores don't really reflect what's going on, that teachers teach to the test, that all scores aren't included. On the other hand, scores are up. Duval County compares much more favorably to other counties in the state. In the country, in fact. Some say the gap between racial groups is enormous. On the other hand, the gap is closing. Perhaps we've come full circle. From the early days of distinction through the disaster and despair of the 60s, shifting to success in the 70s, to confronting new challenges in the 80s. But we can't become complacent. We must remain ever vigilant. Advances are being made. Increases in teacher salaries, phones for teacher accessibility, and renewed sense of professionalism. Many of the private schools that started up as a reaction to desegregation are now themselves integrated. And test scores have risen. We do have a lot to be proud of, and we have a lot of work to do. What will the next decade bring? It's up to each of us to take on those challenges, whatever they may be. The children are our future.
Thank you very much. Superintendent Sang, Secretary Bennett, and members of the Congress who are here, and all of you, thank you very much. I'm going to keep my remarks brief. I'm not going to take a chance on being voted in your yearbooks the president most likely to talk until June. Mothers and fathers, your dedication to your children and the schools has made this community what it is today. Your support is the foundation on which the success of Duval County schools has been built, and on which your own children's success will be built throughout life. Today, all of us say to you, for all you've done, and for all you're doing, and for all you will do, from the bottom of our hearts, thank you. Thank you.